we've been talking long enough. You know how I feel about Division I men's basketball. I think it is way, way, way too big. The idea that, I don't even want to name the school. I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but whoever is ranked 342nd in the country right now, the idea that that school should be competing for the same championship as Kentucky and Duke and Kansas is ridiculous. All right. And this is a byproduct of that on some level. Do you know why it's so easy to bet on Kennesaw State games? Because Kennesaw State is a Division I men's basketball program. But should it be? And I don't mean it about Kennesaw State, but like there's an interesting dynamic here that others have laid out with NIL playing a role. You're a college basketball player now. You are watching some of your former AAU teammates get $1 million contracts, right?
Yes.
At power conference schools.
Yeah.
You weren't good enough to go there, so you end up at the low major school. And NIL is not even a thing there. And your team's not any good. Like, you're losing anyway. And suddenly somebody's like, I can get you 30 grand cash. And buddy, I don't even need you to lose the game. All I need you to do is be behind by 4 at the half and then go beat them by 40 in the second half. I'm not asking you to throw a game. Like, no, people are going to act like, oh, you're going to throw a game. You're not throwing a game. You're just falling behind this many points by the end of the first half and then go win the game. And then so you're okay. We're not, I don't have to throw the game. I just have to be behind by this many points at the half. We'd probably be behind by that many points at the half anyway. So what am I really manipulating? Like, it's easy to see how you get down this path. And as long as we are putting point spreads on games, because they're Division I, between teams ranked 285th in the country and 314th in the country, you're going to be susceptible to stuff like this. And I do not think it's coincidental that it is almost entirely low major and mid majors. That is where that is the easiest and most obvious place to go target people for this. Exactly.
You're correct all the way. The central bad actors in this story were paying out $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 per game, allegedly, to these players, most of whom weren't on any NIL deals, or if they were, minimal at best. Also, the other part of this, how this started, again, you can read all this at .com, but Antonio Blakeney, who I remember seeing on the circuit more than a decade ago. So you see his name pop up in the story, you're like, whoa, was teammates with Ben Simmons, played at LSU, 5-star prospect, and actually spent some time with the Bulls. He's been, a few years back, he was dropping more than 30 a game playing in China. He links up with Hennon and Fairley and then starts manipulating games. And then that allegedly works enough where they get the confidence to start overseas. So they start in China and then they say, okay, let's take this stateside. Let's because apparently Blakeney just had enough connections. Again, this is according to the feds, had enough connections with enough people in the United States where they thought, okay, we could get ins. We've got relationships. We could find the right kind of people that we do this super, super discreetly, super quietly. Like, just tell your boy over there, 20,000 just not to cover the 6.5 in the first half. They won't find us. They won't know. But then what happens? One, just the irregular betting patterns, and people talk. Any number of things make this thing entirely fall down like the house of cards that it is. And
this is
a wild story from a 5-star prospect to that to being now one of the main characters in arguably, immediately the most notorious gambling scandal in college basketball history is pretty nuts.
Yeah, I mean, these goofies are never masterminds, like every time you read about it, it's like, really, you texted that? Like, I mean, I watched enough Datelines to know you can't text that, buddy.
These dudes are not familiar with Signal. The Signal, WhatsApp, encrypted connections did not hit their radar, and so that's another thing that helped bring them down. And in addition to just tracking the bets, they did them in person. These were not offshore. They did these on the phones with sports betting apps, with their web people.
And something you touched on earlier, it was sort of the focus of Dan Wolken's column over at Yahoo Sports about, like, is this just how we're going to live? And there's plenty of reasons to suggest, perhaps, maybe even probably. And as Wolken pointed out, like we asked for this. This is what we said we wanted, and now here we are. Now you
In
get what you
terms of
get.
having that much gambling available at our fingertips.
Hey, man, we need legal sports gambling in America. Why? You can do it in Las Vegas. You can do it in Europe. Why don't we have legal sports gambling in America? And then this state does it, that state does it. Next thing you know, it's everywhere. This is what we said we wanted. And now we got it. I'll read you just a little bit of his column that I thought was interesting. Here's what he wrote. Nearly 8 years ago, when the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, the law that essentially limited sports gambling to Nevada, many of us celebrated. If you could bet on sports at a Las Vegas casino, why shouldn't you be able to do it in similar establishments in New Jersey, Mississippi, or Ohio? It seemed like a win for freedom and common sense, not to mention the casino operators ready to get their claws into new clientele. And what exactly did the rest of us win? We want a never-ending deluge of ads for online sports books. We want a generation of young gambling addicts who are ill-equipped emotionally and financially to handle losing money on long shot parlays. We want a disgraceful level of harassment, both in person, at games, and online, from fans toward athletes who didn't help them cash their bets. And we want a subculture of people like the 6 defendants in this indictment who preyed on young basketball players from low-profile teams that saw their peers cashing in on name, image, and likeness deals and became tempted by the promise of easy money. In other words, we lost something too, maybe a lot. I can't argue with much of that.
Nope, I don't argue with it at all either, honestly. Like, it's a Friday show. We're going to do the Final Four in one. Not sponsored by a gambling company today, by the way. And, you know, that segment is always about just previewing the weekend and making ourselves look silly and maybe giving you a few stats or whatever. For the most part, I think people that intake this particular show realize that, you know, where I stand on when it comes to gambling and all that stuff. And yeah, GP might not be able to help himself with the Mets. Maybe.
Listen. I do gamble. I literally take money from gambling companies, right?
Yeah.
There have been parts of this show that have been sponsored by gambling companies.
Yes.
Like, we're in it. I'm not going to be a hypocrite here, but I will also always speak honestly about this. I do gamble. It has never wrecked my life, but I have seen it wreck people's lives. People I care about, people I'm close with. I've seen it devastate them, financially devastate them, and then ruin other aspects of their life, mess up their job, mess up their marriage, mess up relationships with children, mess up relationships with family members. So this is serious stuff. I'm never the one out there going, yeah, man, just go gamble all day long and get to the casinos and bet. You know, everybody's free to make their own decisions. I don't judge, but this stuff can be very, very dangerous and devastating. I have seen it up close.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I'll just extend the PSA by saying, like, if just general life advice, like, you know, do not wager a single cent that you can't afford to lose, obviously. But I do think, to the point of Dan's column, this is probably, like, I don't know how many stories like this have to surface before enough people that actually compete in mainstream American sports get scared enough. If I was a college basketball coach, this story happens, like, practice can wait, literally everything can wait. And I'm taking the opportunity again to say, go read this story, go read that story. You see this clip, you see this podcast, not one of you better remotely be even considering thinking about any of this. You're done. Your life's ruined. You'll never play competitive sports again. Obviously, the vast majority of Division I men's basketball players are not engaging in this kind of behavior, but you never know who is. And I had a conversation with a coach just a couple of months ago talking about a variety of things, but this topic came up. And he admitted, he was like, man, I think my roster's good. And he was like half joking, half serious. He's like, but I'm telling you, like, there have been a couple of times where I've been like, what the hell did I just see on the floor? Like, is that incompetence? How am I supposed to know? Am I going to take my player aside and be like, hey, are you throwing the first half line for us? So, and it was an enlightening conversation. And he was like, you know, you do your best to safeguard against it, but ultimately, if someone's motivated enough to do something, you can't necessarily stop them. So it's not like college coaches are going out there and ignorant. They're very aware of it. And particularly, the coach I spoke with is not a high major coach. They are a head coach at a mid-major school who genuinely had some, like, I had to call a couple of my other he mentioned he called a couple other coaches and they admitted to the same worries as well. So this thing is really crept up to the forefront of many a coach's mind, and we wait and see on what happens next. I do think we'll have more from not just this case, but I think there's going to be a few other players that weren't named in this that could pop up, sprout up here in the months to come, if not later in the year. So just keep an eye on that. And until then, we wait and see on prop bets. The NCAA is asking for Congress for help to basically fix its entire existence. I don't know if that is going to happen. It would be a start. I just don't like the idea of any 19-year-old having an over under of 8.5 rebounds. They grab 7 and suddenly they're just subject to an inundation of online harassment and death threats. You got to get that out of the culture as much as you feasibly possibly can, and by eliminating prop bets, you at least do that. You don't fix the notion that someone could be compromised to try and toss a game or toss a line, but at least it's something. Something is better than nothing. But here we are, and this is the first major story of 2026. When we go to the end of the year, we do our year interview, this story will be in the top 10 unquestionably, because this kind of stuff is serious. If you don't have the structural integrity that the competition is honest on both ends, you have nothing. It is the very single thing that every league, Roger Goodell, Adam Silver, Rob Manfred, go down the line, every commissioner, if you don't have this, you have nothing. You have professional wrestling, and that is where everything crumbles. You need to have your games have structural integrity. If the public doesn't believe it's true, perception can become reality, and then everything begins to fritter away. That's why this story is so important, even lacking high-profile schools, high-profile players, any of that. It's just as important that it was happening at the MAC level and the MEAC level as it would be if it was happening in the Big Ten or the SEC.
If college basketball turns into professional wrestling, we're going to look up one day, they're going to have the Final Four in Saudi Arabia. You ready to cover the Final Four in Saudi Arabia?
I am not.
I bet you somebody's thought about that.
We can keep it moving, but quite literally there have been, not Saudi Arabia, but there have been ongoing plans for a couple of years now to try and get a game or two for a ton of money played in the Middle East in general, and we'll see if that comes to the fore.
So you mentioned the coaches being concerned about seeing incompetence on the court and wondering if it's just incompetence or something more. And I know I've seen other people make note of, hey, it's just like we noted earlier, it's just low major teams and coaches I never heard of and players I never heard of. Well, if you're a fan of a high major team, where do you think your coach came from? Probably a place like this. Like there is somebody, and I don't want to get hyperbolic here, but like there is somebody who possibly is on their way to the type of season that could get them the next job, but they got players in their program that are compromised, and therefore the season doesn't go the way it otherwise would, and you never get the ACC job that you otherwise might have gotten. I'm not saying that happened, but it obviously could. And so, yeah, this is bad stuff. And just to double down on what you said, and then we can move on. You mentioned, hey, like, PSA, if you don't have money to lose, do not gamble with it. I'll take it a step further. You won't win. So don't even think about it. Can I afford to lose this? Don't even I'm going to lose this. Is it all right if I do? Is it all right when I do? Think of it like that. I have a buddy who used to run a sports book, before everybody had the apps on their phone. And
I think the correct framing for that is I have a buddy who used to be a bookie. I don't think did he run a sports book, like an actual sports book?
I mean, he if you needed to put in bets, that he was the person you got in touch with type of thing.
That's the bookie.
Okay. How you can describe him however you want. All right. And I asked him one time, I was just picking his brain, and I was like, so how long you been doing this? And he gave me a number, and I said, so how many people play with you regular? Like you would call them regular customers. And he gave me a number, and let's just say it was, it's a pretty big number. And I said, okay, out of all of those people, how many, at the end of a year or at the end of 6 months or at the end of 2 years, how many are up, they're winners? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, just like they've been gambling all year, football, baseball, basketball, whatever. At the end of the year, they're up. How many of those customers do you have? 0 was his answer. 0. That guy does not exist. That's what sports gambling is. If you want to know how they can afford to put a commercial on every 30 seconds,
yes.
Yeah, that's gambling. That's
Correct.
gambling.
I mean, you and I have gone to Vegas, and you go to Vegas, and you're like I'll do a little blackjack. Okay, I'm cool if I go play, have some fun with GP or whomever at the tables for 3 hours. I lose $200. I can whatever. That's that's what it is. You just have to know what the deal is.
That's exactly right.